The box wasn't heavy. That was the worst part. 31 years of her mother's life, packed into a shoebox that weighed almost nothing, a stack of photographs with curled edges, 2 folded letters tied with kitchen twine, and at the very bottom, wrapped in a piece of old flannel that had gone soft with age, a Bronze Star medal with its ribbon, still bright, still red, white, and blue, as if the years hadn't touched it at all. Nurse Faye Novak sat in the parking lot of the Save Right Pawn and Loan on West Coulter Avenue and told herself she was just going to look at the comps online one more time. She had her phone in her hand. She had pulled up 3 different appraisal sites. She had read the same paragraph about military decoration valuation 4 times without absorbing a single word. Outside, a man was loading a flat-screen television into the back of a pickup truck. A woman in a yellow coat walked past without looking at anything. The pawn shop sign blinked once, twice, then held steady. Faye put her phone away. She was 32 years old. She had $214 in her checking account, a disconnection notice from the electric company folded in her glove box, and 4 days until her landlord had told her, politely, regretfully, firmly, that he would have to move forward with the eviction process if she couldn't bring the balance current. She hadn't eaten a real meal since Tuesday. It was Friday now. She picked up the box. She got out of the car. The thing people don't understand about hitting a wall, a real wall, not a bad week or a rough patch, but the kind of wall where your options have genuinely narrowed to almost nothing, is that it doesn't feel dramatic. There's no music. There's no slow-motion moment of reckoning. You just find yourself standing in a parking lot with a shoebox, and you walk toward the door, and the door opens, and a little bell rings overhead, and the man behind the counter looks up from his paperwork with the practiced, neutral expression of someone who has seen everything and is no longer moved by any of it. "Help you?" he said. His name tag said Glynn. He was somewhere in his 60s, with reading glasses pushed up on his forehead and a coffee mug that said "World's Okayest Boss" in faded letters. Faye set the box on the glass counter. "I have a medal," she said. "Military, Bronze Star. I wanted to know what you could give me for it." Glenn set down his pen. He looked at the box, then at her, then at the box again. "Let me see it," he said. 6 months earlier, Faye Novak had been a night shift charge nurse in the cardiac step-down unit at Hendrick Memorial Hospital in Alton, Indiana. She had been there for 4 years. She had been, by every measurable standard, good at her job, not just competent, but the kind of nurse that other nurses asked questions of, that new residents relied on when they were uncertain, that patients remembered by name when they came back for follow-up appointments. She had a particular gift for catching the thing that was about to go wrong before it went wrong. Her coworkers called it her doom radar. She called it paying attention. She had been paying attention the night Clifton Morrow came through the cardiac unit. Morrow was the hospital's chief operating officer. He was 53, trim, with the careful confidence of a man who had spent decades being listened to in rooms. He had come in with chest tightening and elevated troponins, and was being admitted for observation. This was routine. What was not routine was the chart discrepancy Faye noticed during her handoff review, a medication interaction that the admitting physician had documented as flagged and resolved, but which Faye, looking at the actual reconciled medication list, could not find evidence of being resolved. It was possible it was a documentation error. It was possible someone had caught it verbally and simply failed to note it. It was also possible that a man with a known sensitivity to a blood thinner was about to receive a contraindicated dosage in 4 hours. Faye flagged it. She escalated it through the proper channel, which meant she called the attending physician, Dr. Raymond Cassell, and told him what she had found. Dr. Cassell thanked her. He told her he would look into it. At 2 a.m., Faye found the medication had been administered. She checked the chart. The contraindication flag had been removed. The documentation now showed the interaction as reviewed and resolved per physician order. The signature was Cassell's. Morrow did not have a reaction. He was discharged 2 days later without incident. Faye spent a week telling herself it was fine. The physician had made a judgment call. She had done her job by flagging it, and that was the end of her responsibility. But she had seen Cassell's signature before. She knew what it looked like, and the signature on that revised chart entry didn't look right to her. She filed a concern report through the hospital's internal quality system. She kept a copy. 3 weeks later, she was called into a meeting with her unit manager, a woman named Cheryl Poole, and a man from Human Resources she had never seen before. They told her that her performance had been raising concerns. They told her there had been complaints about her communication style. They told her that effective immediately, she was being placed on a performance improvement plan. Faye asked for the specifics of the complaints. They told her the complaints were confidential. She asked who had filed them. They said that information could not be disclosed. She asked when these concerns had begun, and they said they had been accumulating over some time. She had never been written up. She had a commendation in her file from the previous year. She had a patient satisfaction score in the 91st percentile. She signed nothing. She asked for everything in writing. 4 weeks after the PIP began, before its conclusion date, she was terminated. The stated reason was failure to demonstrate required improvement in professional conduct and communication. She filed for unemployment. It was denied on the basis that she had been terminated for cause. She hired an employment attorney. He reviewed her materials, told her she had something, and then stopped returning her calls after she couldn't make the third payment on his retainer. She applied for nursing positions at 7 other hospitals in the region. She had 2 interviews. Neither led to anything. She would learn later, much later, that her employment verification calls were going somewhere they shouldn't have been going, and what was being said on those calls was not what was in her official file. She applied for emergency rental assistance. She was told she was on the waiting list. She sold her furniture. She sold her second car. She moved her remaining things into a storage unit on Route 9 and went to live on her friend Darlene's pull-out couch, which she had been doing for 11 weeks by the time she drove to Save Right Pawn and Loan on a gray Friday morning in November with her mother's bronze star in a shoebox. Darlene worked double shifts at an Amazon warehouse and had 2 kids under 8 and a mortgage and credit card debt and was doing all of this on her own. She hadn't asked Faye to leave. She hadn't needed to. Some things don't need to be said out loud. Faye had exactly $214. The electric bill was $340. The rent arrearage was $1,650. She had done the math so many times that the numbers no longer felt like numbers. They felt like stones she was carrying. She had learned to walk with them. Her mother, Faye Novak, had served as an Army combat medic during 2 deployments. One to Iraq in 2004, one to Afghanistan in 2007. She had earned the Bronze Star in the 2nd deployment for actions during a medevac operation under fire that resulted in the survival of 3 critically wounded soldiers. She had come home from that deployment with the medal, a hearing loss in her left ear, and a way of going very quiet sometimes that her daughter had learned not to interrupt. Faye Novak had died 3 years ago of pancreatic cancer, 8 months after the diagnosis. She had not left much behind, which was fine. She had not been a woman who accumulated things. What she had left behind was that shoebox, which she had pressed into Faye's hands 2 weeks before she died and said, "Don't lose this." She hadn't specified what this meant. The letters, maybe. The photographs. The medal. Faye had carried the box through 4 apartments, 2 states, and 1 complete dismantling of her life. She had never once opened it with the intention of selling anything. But the numbers were the numbers, and she didn't know what else to do. Glenn took the medal out of the flannel wrapping with the kind of careful handling that surprised her. He didn't reach for his glasses. He just looked at it, turning it over once, reading the inscription on the back. "Bronze Star with Valor device," he said. "Yes," Faye said. "This was your mother's." She hadn't told him it was her mother's. She had just said it was military. She wasn't sure how he knew. Maybe she just looked like a woman who had not served, standing there in her scrub print jacket with her hair in a 3-day bun holding a shoebox. "Yes," she said again. Glenn set the medal down on a cloth he had pulled from under the counter. "I can't give you what it's worth," he said. "You understand that. That's not how this works. I know I can give you $350. Conditions good. Ribbons intact. The Valor device is $350, Faye said. She stared at the medal. Her mother's name wasn't on it. Military medals generally weren't engraved with names, but she knew it as completely as she knew her own face. She knew the way the ribbon faded slightly at the left edge where the sun had hit it through a window in her mother's apartment. She knew the small scratch on the lower right corner of the star that had happened when Lorraine had dropped it once, and it had skittered across a hardwood floor, and they had both laughed about it. $350 would not fix anything. It would keep the lights on for 1 more month. It would not touch the rent arrearage. It would not pay for food for more than a few weeks. It was not a solution to anything. It was just the next thing that would let her not fall apart quite yet. "Okay," she said. She did not cry. She was very practiced at not crying at the moment things happened. She did her crying later by herself in the dark, where it cost nothing and inconvenienced no one. She was reaching for the box. She wasn't sure why. Some reflex, she didn't need the box. When the door behind her opened and a dog walked in. Not walked. That wasn't right. The dog moved in that low, deliberate way that working dogs have, close to the floor, head slightly lowered, the tactical vest across its back identifying it immediately as something other than a pet. A Belgian Malinois, she thought, though she had no reason to know that and wasn't sure where the identification came from. Dark-faced, lean, with the focused, assessing eyes of an animal that had been trained to take in a room and know within 2 seconds what it contained. It crossed the floor to the counter. It put its paws up on the glass beside the metal. It looked at the metal. Then it sat down, pressed itself against Faye's legs, and did not move. Faye looked down at it. The dog looked up at her, then it looked back at the metal. The man who had come in behind the dog appeared in her peripheral vision. She heard him say, "Rex, come!" in a voice that was quiet and steady and accustomed to being obeyed. The dog did not come. The man said it again. The dog pressed harder against her legs. She finally turned to look at him. He was maybe 40, with the cropped posture of someone who had spent years being asked to fit into smaller spaces than he occupied, and the particular stillness that Faye had learned to recognize in people who had learned to keep their reactions interior. He was in civilian clothes, jeans, a worn canvas jacket, but the bearing said something else. On his jacket's chest pocket was a small enamel pin she didn't recognize. He looked at the metal on the counter. He looked at her. "I'm sorry," he said. "He doesn't usually." He stopped. He was looking at the metal again. He took 2 steps forward. "Is that a bronze star?" "Yes." "Valor device?" "Yes." He was very still for a moment. Not the stillness of someone who didn't know what to do, but the stillness of someone who was processing something quickly and wanted to be certain before they said it. "Was that earned in a medevac operation?" he said. "In Kunar Province, 2007? The air in the room changed. "My mother's," Faye said. "Lorraine Novak. She was a combat medic." Something moved across the man's face, not theatrically. Just a shift the way light changes when a cloud moves. "I know that name," he said. His name was Garrett Solis. He had been a Marine Corps scout sniper, not a SEAL. He was careful to make that correction, not from vanity but from accuracy, and Faye would later think that this was the first indicator she had of who he was as a person. He had been embedded with a joint unit in Kunar Province in the winter of 2007. He had been 22 years old. He had been one of 3 critically wounded soldiers brought in by medevac that night. "I didn't know her name," he said. They were sitting in the 2 plastic chairs that Glenn had produced from somewhere without being asked, and Glenn had also produced 2 cups of coffee from a machine in the back, and was now pretending to reorganize a display of vintage cameras on the far side of the shop with the practiced diplomacy of a man who understood that some conversations required the illusion of privacy. It was bad. I don't have a lot of it. I remember hands. I remember someone saying, "Stay with me," about 40 times. I remember thinking the voice was the only thing keeping me. He stopped. I never knew her name. Rex had not moved from Faye's side. He was not seeking pets or reassurance. He was simply present in the way that working dogs sometimes are, grounded and calm and utterly certain of where he was supposed to be. "She never talked about it much," Faye said. "She talked about the people she lost, not the ones she looked at her hands. She didn't like the word saved. She said that word gave the wrong idea about how little control anyone had over anything." Garrett looked at the metal. "You were going to sell it," he said. "Not an accusation. Just the understanding of someone who was good at reading situations." She didn't answer, which was its own answer. "Can I ask why?" So she told him. She was not sure why. She was not generally someone who told things to strangers, but there was something about the setting, the pawn shop, the dog, the metal on the counter, the way that Glenn was very deliberately not listening, that had tilted her outside of her usual caution. She told him about the chart discrepancy, and Morrow, and Cassell, and the PIP, and the termination, and the unemployment denial, and the attorney who had stopped returning her calls, and the storage unit on Route 9, and Darlene's pull-out couch. and the $214 and the disconnection notice and the landlord. When she finished, Garrett was quiet for a moment. The hospital reported her to the state nursing board, he said. She looked at him. What? Or they will. That's the next move usually, when they want to make it permanent. He said it without satisfaction, like someone identifying a weather pattern. I've seen this before. Not with nurses. With. He stopped. It doesn't matter. The pattern is the same. The point is that what you filed, the concern report, that's documentation. That exists somewhere. And if they've suppressed or altered chart entries, that's not just a hospital policy violation. That's falsification of medical records. I know what it is, Faye said. I can't prove it. You filed a quality concern report. You said you kept a copy. I have a copy. And you said the signature didn't look right. I can't prove that either. I'm not a handwriting expert. You don't need to be a handwriting expert, Garrett said. You need someone who has reason to take a formal look, which requires someone with standing to request an investigation. He reached into his jacket pocket and took out a phone. I know someone. Faye did not let herself believe anything for a long time. She was practiced at not believing things, because hope had a specific cost that she had gotten very clear on over the past 6 months. She knew exactly what it felt like to build something on the expectation that a thing would work out, and she knew what it felt like when it didn't, and she had stopped doing that. She kept the medal. Glenn did not seem surprised. He told her when she picked it up off the counter that he didn't do military decorations anyway. She looked at him sharply, and he spread his hands and said, not unkindly, that it just wasn't his area. She went back to Darlene's couch. She told Darlene a version of what had happened that was approximately true. Darlene said, huh, in the particular way that meant she was withholding a larger response for later, which was one of the things Faye loved about her. 3 days later, a woman named Adrienne Cross called Faye from a number with a DC area code. She identified herself as an investigative attorney with a nonprofit organization that worked specifically on healthcare worker retaliation cases. She had been contacted by someone, she didn't say who, and she had reviewed Faye's publicly available unemployment case file, and she had some questions. Faye answered the questions. Adrienne Cross said she would call again within the week. She called within 2 days. In the weeks that followed, Faye learned the shape of what had been done to her with a clarity that was both vindicating and sickening. The concern report she had filed had been received. It had been reviewed, not by the quality department, but by Morrow's assistant, who had forwarded it to Morrow. The chart revision had occurred within 6 hours of that forward. The complaints that had been used to justify her PIP had been filed by Cassell and by Cheryl Poole, both within the same 48-hour window. The employment verification calls, 2 of the 7 hospitals she had applied to had kept records of them, which they provided, had come not from HR but from a personal cell phone registered to Cassell. This was not a case of a hospital having a policy problem. This was 3 people who had deliberately coordinated to destroy a nurse's career because she had noticed something she wasn't supposed to notice. The Indiana State Department of Health opened an investigation into Hendrick Memorial's quality documentation practices. The investigation, once it had access to the electronic health record system, found 3 other instances of retroactive chart alterations over an 18-month period. All of them during Cassell's shift rotations, all of them on patients with significant administrative connections to the hospital. Cassell resigned before the investigation concluded. He was later reported to the state medical board. Morrow retired, effective immediately, citing health and family considerations. Cheryl Poole was placed on administrative leave. Faye's reinstatement to the Indiana Nursing Registry. It had been suspended during the complaint process, a piece of information she had not known until Adrienne told her, which was the closest she came to not being able to hold it together, was processed in early February. The hospital's legal counsel, working with the advocacy organization, reached a settlement. Faye was advised not to discuss the specific terms, and she didn't. What she could say, and what she told Darlene, sitting at the kitchen table at 10 o'clock at night with 2 cups of chamomile tea while the kids were asleep, was that the rent was current, the lights were on, and she had a start date, not at Hendrick Memorial. She would not go back there. She had been offered a position at Crestview Regional in the cardiac ICU, which was a step up in acuity and paid accordingly, which was a thing she hadn't even thought to want in the middle of everything, but which felt, now, exactly right. "So you're good?" Darlene said. "I think so," Faye said. "For real good or for I'm fine good?" Faye looked at her tea. "For real," she said. "I think actually for real." Darlene nodded. She put her hand over Faye's on the table for a moment, and then she picked up her mug and drank her tea, and they sat there for a while without saying anything, which was enough. Garrett Solis came to Faye's going-away dinner at Darlene's apartment. It wasn't really a going-away dinner. It was just Darlene making her good red beans and rice and inviting 4 people, but it became that. He brought Rex, and Rex accepted exactly 1 piece of cornbread from Darlene's older daughter, who was 7, and then returned to his post of sitting near Faye with the absolute seriousness of a dog who had decided where he was supposed to be. Faye had asked him once, a few weeks earlier, why he had gone into the pawn shop that day. He said he'd been on his way to the auto parts store next door, and Rex had simply veered. She had asked if Rex did that often. Garrett had thought about it and said that Rex was generally very good at his job, and part of his job had always been knowing when someone needed him to be somewhere. She wasn't sure she entirely believed that as an explanation, but she believed it enough. She had not cried, in the end, when she put the medal back in the shoebox. She had not cried when Adrian Cross called with the resolution. She had not cried when the reinstatement came through. She cried the first night she was back in her own apartment, a different one, smaller than before but hers, when she unpacked the shoebox and took out the bronze star and set it on the windowsill where the light would find it in the morning, the way it had in her mother's apartment, the way she remembered. She stood there for a while, looking at it. Faye Novak had carried 3 soldiers home from a dark mountainside in the middle of a firefight and never once called it heroism. She had called it being in the right place at the right time and doing what was in front of her to do. Faye thought that she understood now what her mother had meant by that. Not because she had done anything that anyone would put a star on, but because she had learned, slowly, expensively, in ways she had not chosen, that being in the right place and doing the thing in front of you was harder than it sounded and more important than it looked, and that sometimes the measure of a person was just that they kept doing it even when everything was against them. She left the medal on the windowsill. She went to bed. In the morning, the light found it, and it was still there, just as bright as it had always been, as if the years hadn't touched it at all.